Good evening. You will remember that one of these evenings I said that you cannot heal through the human mind. I mean, of course, that you cannot heal spiritually through the human mind, no matter how much knowledge of truth you have. The human mind just is not a healer and never can be. You can do some mental healing with the human mind, but that's not in the nature of healing. That is merely in the nature of changing one physical condition into another physical condition. It is not bringing about a change of consciousness that results in a permanent harmony. Spiritual healing cannot be accomplished through the human mind. Spiritual healing is accomplished when some measure is attained of that mind. That mind that was in Christ Jesus, it is called, or you might call it spiritual consciousness or illumined consciousness, divine consciousness, Christ consciousness, or the Orientals call it the Buddha mind. When you attain the Buddha mind, you are in the fourth dimension of life. When you attain the Christ or spiritual consciousness, you are in the fourth dimension of life, and you can heal. Now, the reason you can heal, and I go back to this question, what did Jesus mean when he said, "None of these things move me, and the prince of this world cometh and hath nothing in me"? The human mind looks upon evil in every form as power. And the human mind is always set to destroy evil, to battle it, to overcome it, to fight it, to treat it. And of course it can't. That's why the human mind can't heal. The human mind is made up of the belief of two powers. And the human mind is always trying to use the power of good to overcome the power of evil. And there is no healing in such a consciousness. But the attainment of even a measure of spiritual consciousness reveals that evil is not a power. Thou, Pilate, couldst have no power over me. Or, to the paralyzed man, what did hinder you? Pick up your bed and walk. Or, to the blind, open your eyes. Do you see in that? No battle against evil, no battle against disease. The woman taken in adultery, neither do I condemn thee. No battle, no argument, no trying to reform her, no crusade against immorality. Just thy sins be forgiven thee. Now, the Master, as proven by his ministry, attained the very highest degree of spiritual realization, so that he did not at any time battle error. Put up thy sword. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He did not battle error in any form. He recognized its nothingness. And that is what those two passages mean. Jesus did not respond to error by saying, "I have a power to heal it," or "I will call on God to heal it." Even at the tomb of Lazarus, he said, "I do not have to pray." Why? There is no such thing as truth overcoming error. There is no such thing as the immortal overcoming the mortal. This is all a part of the very humanhood that has to be overcome, this belief in two powers. And for centuries upon centuries, people have been trying to use the power of God to overcome the errors of this world, and the errors of this world keep increasing. Yet they don't seem to learn what Robert Frost learned, that you can pray up to God and bring to Him all the miseries of this earth, and God just isn't there. Now, 3 times in the history of the world, the revelation has been given regarding the nature of evil. In Gautama the Buddha's search for that which would overcome the evils of earth, sin, disease, death, and poverty, the revelation that was given to him under the Bodhi tree was, this is all illusion, not reality. And he immediately began a healing ministry, not based on having God do something to disease, but based on the awareness that if you can see it, hear it, taste it, touch it, or smell it, it's illusion. Therefore, it's not to be battled or fought or overcome. It is to be recognized for its illusory nature. Thereby he healed. Christ Jesus, 500 years later, came to the same identical awakening. Put up thy sword, resist not evil. Resist not evil. Why? It isn't power. Your acceptance of it as power and your battling of it perpetuates it. Only in the degree that you can say, what did hinder you? And not try mentally to reach out and heal somebody. Only in that degree can you be a spiritual healer. The moment you concern yourself with healing somebody or changing their condition of mind, body, or pocketbook, you're in the dream with them, and it's the blind leading the blind. It is only in the degree that you can rise in spiritual awareness to behold the illusory nature of evil that you can heal spiritually. Now, there are 2 major revelations in the message of the infinite way. That absolutely agree with this revelation of the Buddha and Christ Jesus. And it was given to me long before I knew the teachings of either of these. And that is this: evil, error in any form, has its source in an impersonal cause, if you want to call it that, although it's not really a cause because it has no effect. Source, I would say. All evil has its rise in an impersonal source. And that impersonal source is the universal belief in 2 powers. This is where we get all evil. You lose evil out of your life in proportion as you rise to a place in consciousness where you recognize that God is spirit and that spirit alone is power. That there is no power aside from spirit. Not that there isn't a claim of material power and mental power in the human world. But remember, you can't change that until you get above the material and mental levels into the spiritual And it is here that you recognize the illusory nature of so-called evil powers. Now, the Hindus, who had the best opportunity of any people in all the world to be the spiritual lights of the world, not only lost that opportunity, but they lost their entire demonstration through a misinterpretation of Buddha's teaching. They taught, as they do now, that this world is an illusion and your body is an illusion. And that's why they don't bother to heal it, don't want to heal it spiritually. That's why they make no effort to build a successful industry. They're doing more now since they've been brought into the Western world, but it's certainly against their religious principles to be concerned about money or industry or modernizing their cities or water supply. Why? Because to them it's all an illusion. This isn't true. This world is the temple of God. The illusion is in our sense of this world. We entertain an illusory sense of the world. The world itself is an illusion. God never created an illusion, and God did create a world. And since there are not two creators, there can't be two worlds. There is only one world, but it's a world that in our human sense that we see through a glass darkly. If only we could see it face to face, this very universe would be the temple of God, as your individual body would be. Your individual body is the temple of God, and you are seeing it through a glass darkly. You are seeing it through the universal belief in two powers. Now, as you learn this principle of the infinite way, you will find that you will disregard appearances. You won't disregard the people you meet, and you won't disregard their bodies. You won't disregard their businesses. You will disregard the appearances, knowing that you are witnessing these appearances through the illusory sense, the belief in two powers. And ignoring the appearance, not letting the devil get a rise out of me, ignoring the appearance and realizing, oh no, Spirit is the only creator, and Spirit's universe is spiritual, and Spirit is the only power. So you close your eyes to the appearance, know this truth, and then watch harmony appear. Now, you can't enter this fourth dimensional or Christ consciousness while you are trying to change appearances. You are still in the human mind taking up the sword, only it's a mental sword. Therefore, you never can have a really successful spiritual treatment. Not until you understand that you are not trying to change a condition of matter, nor are you trying to change a condition of mind or of purse, that you are ignoring all appearances and abiding in the truth of the one life, the one soul, the one spirit, the one spiritual law. Now, that brings us to this question. Would you please clarify these statements from recent monthly letters? March letter. Not a single thing in you is responsible for any of your ills. By seeking within yourself or within your patient for the cause of the trouble, you are helping to perpetuate it. Now that is in answer to all of the metaphysical teachings based on uncovering the error in your patient. We work from the opposite standpoint. As a matter of fact, all of our infinite way work is the very opposite of that which is taught in all of the metaphysical movements. We do not agree with any one of the metaphysical movements in our major premises. We do not agree that mind is God. We do not agree that there is any error in the thought of your patient that has to be uncovered. We work entirely from the standpoint that all evil, regardless of its name or nature, is impersonal, has its source in what we might term the carnal mind or mortal mind, which is not mind, but a belief, a universal belief in two powers. It isn't even your belief or mine. It is a universal belief in two powers. In this way, we remove the malpractice from you. The moment anyone starts to look for error in you, they are malpracticing you, because you are the temple of God. Your body is the temple of God, and there is nothing in you that defileth or maketh a lie. And whatever appears to be erroneous is merely your acceptance of the universal belief in two powers. Now, the May letter says, "It must be plain, therefore, that if you are not free, it is because of your lack of knowing the truth. Ignorance is responsible for your ills." And there you have the confirmation. It's not a contradiction. The error isn't in you, the error that produced your ill. Ignorance of truth is responsible. In other words, no one told us from the time we were born that evil doesn't belong to us. We have been blamed for everything from the time we were 6 months old and bunked our knees in a chair. It was our fault. Everything's been our fault almost from the time we were born, until we actually believe that we're a lot of sinners by now. We haven't ever committed a sin that was our fault, that wasn't the result of the ignorance of its source. Watch what happens to you. Watch what happens to your members of your family and patients and students the moment you stop malpracticing them and accusing them, openly or silently, of sin, disease, death, lack, or limitation, and begin to realize, "Father, forgive me for entertaining such thoughts about thy children. All that I've been beholding is really a universal belief in two powers. And they're not to blame for that. Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. They weren't taught. And we weren't." So it is that this is not a contradiction. This is a confirmation. There is no responsibility on your part for your particular ills. And those references were aimed especially at the belief that resentment causes rheumatism, or jealousy causes cancer, or fear causes something else. There never was any truth in that, except as a medical belief. And watch how healings take place the moment you deny that disease has any mental cause, and place it where it belongs, in the realm of illusion, based on this universal belief in two powers. So that to be able to heal through the message of the infinite way, you must first of all understand God, and that God appears as men and women. God is individually expressed as you and me. And therefore, we are the image and likeness. We are the very manifestation of all that God is. We are God in expression. This is the truth of our being. And any appearance to the contrary is based on the universal belief in two powers. It is entirely impersonal, and because it was not created by God, It is not power, has no law to sustain it. You are now impersonalizing and nothingizing. And all of you who have access to tapes, if you will study any of the 1959 classes, you will find that I spent the entire year of 1959 teaching these 2 points so that we would develop more healers and have more healings. And actually we have had more of both ever since 1959, when it became clearer to our students what specific principles we are working with. Always remember, it is not you or this world that is an illusion. It is the concept that we entertain of you and of this world that is the illusion. If I could illustrate it, I would do it this way. An illusion cannot be objectified. Now take that into your thought for a minute and see if you can prove me wrong. See if you can objectify an illusion. And you will find that all you can do is have a mental image in thought, but you cannot objectify it. Take the belief that 2 times 2 is 5 and try to objectify that for me. Try to take the sky that sits on a mountain and objectify that. Try to take the ocean out in the desert and objectify that. Or that great big city off in the distance in the desert and objectify that. You never will make them other than what they are. Mental images in thought. Illusory in nature, therefore having no substance, cause, law, or reality. And the moment you begin to perceive that the evils of this world are mental concepts which have their basis in the belief that there are 2 powers, you begin to see the dissolving of these false appearances. Firstly, because you're not battling them. Try to go in and battle that water on the desert. Try to go in and fight your way through that city on the desert. Tear down its walls. You'll drive yourself mad. Fighting with something that doesn't exist. And when you try to fight disease, sin, lack, limitation, believe me, you are fighting an illusion. And as long as you're in the 3rd dimensional mind, the mind that has 2 powers, you just can't help resisting evil. It is only when you come up higher, come up into this higher attitude and altitude of consciousness and begin to perceive the illusory nature of appearances, that you will not fight, you will not battle, you will sit back in meditation and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth." And then you will receive impartations from within. Sometimes the very voice says, "Knowest thou not this is my Son in whom I am well pleased?" And here you would think you were sitting beside a dying person. The Master revealed that my kingdom is not of this world. My peace I give unto you, not as the world giveth. In other words, you must come up higher in consciousness. You must attain some measure of spiritual light. And you can only do this if you can recognize that the only evil there is anywhere on earth is a universal belief in 2 powers. This is the only evil there is. And this is the only reason we fight error, because we believe it to be a power. But there is only one power. You cannot have omnipotence and another power. I don't know how theology takes the word omnipotence and then makes it a power to fight evil. I don't know how it does that. Certainly not through logic or semantics. because omnipotence must mean what it says, all power, and omnipotence refers to spirit. And once you have spirit as your only power and your only law, you begin to lose your fear of material and mental powers. You do not battle, you do not struggle, you sit back peaceably in the realization of thy kingdom is come on earth as it is in heaven. Of course it is. The moment you stop battling evil, heaven has come on earth. Because there are not two places, heaven and earth. The earth is heaven when you have overcome the belief in two powers. You'll find this is the grandest world to live in. You'll never want to die out of it once you've overcome the belief in two powers. This is really, really a magnificent place. The only thing that spoils it is when that belief in two powers comes in. That's what spoiled it for Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. Good and evil came along, and that wrecked it. But you restore yourself in Eden in proportion as you grasp the omnipotence of God, the omniscience of God, the omnipresence of God, and then realize there can be nothing but God's presence, God's being, God's life, God's law. And then you'll find that wherever there is a receptive thought, they respond to it, and healing takes place. Now, it doesn't mean that if we don't respond the first day or the first month that we are not receptive. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that we need a transformation of consciousness, and it is strange that we may yield on many different points and still find one or more points remaining obstinate or obdurate within us. I have witnessed, in my experience, that there are times when a particular error remains until I have come to see some specific truth. In other words, just generalizing doesn't move everything. In other words, let me go back a bit. When this was first revealed to me, that the metaphysical world was working upside down in personalizing evil, I very soon discovered that about 80% of all the claims that were brought to me were quickly met. I had to work hard with the remaining 20%, and some of those, of course, never did yield. Then I caught the light of why. Let us take, for instance, the flu season, the season for influenza. And a lot of people catch cold, have grippe, flu. But I no need to tell you that nobody committed any crime to catch cold. They were merely victims of that universal belief in infection and contagion. It had nothing to do with them whatsoever. And therefore, healings of any of those seasonal ills, in most cases, should be instantaneous. Why? Because even in the metaphysical world, it must be recognized that nobody has to do anything to catch a cold or get the flu, that it's absolutely an impersonal affliction. Now, in my work, I carried this further and discovered that about 80% of all of the ills that afflict us are equally impersonal in their nature. They're due either to some universal belief of food, or universal belief of climate, or universal belief of weather. And you watch with almost all of the ills of mankind, and you will find that this work will bring forth very close to 80% of very quick healings. For this reason, it recognizes the impersonal source, the impersonal nature, and then quickly dispels it. But these other claims that last longer, they have been absorbed into our consciousness personally. For instance, cancer and consumption. There has risen such a world fear of these, and now heart disease. There has risen such a world fear that long before we get them, we're fearing them. Long before we get them, we're being horrified because we might get them. And so what we're really doing is preparing soil for them to take root in. And then after they do take root, it's a little more difficult to get them out, because our own fears and disbelief, really, we don't really believe we're going to get rid of them because they have been considered so incurable. We just hang on to them, and they're a little more difficult to move. Now, there are other things that, because of our human experience, we have hugged to ourselves and made them more personal. They never can be personal, but we have made them more personal, and by clinging to them, we make it a little more difficult to heal. Except for those that we do hug to ourselves in some way, or those we fear so tremendously, healing should be a very simple thing in the infinite way. It involves entirely the ability not to react to appearances, the ability to realize I'm not dealing with a condition that has to be fought. I'm dealing with that illusory sense of two powers, and since it isn't of God, it isn't. All that God made is good. That doesn't mean there is any evil, because it also says that what God didn't make wasn't made. So evil was never made. Therefore, evil does not exist. And only being fooled by the illusory appearance continues us in the evils of this world. Let us see now where we are. I am the practitioner, and you are presenting to me an appearance. Sin, disease, death, age, lack, limitation, infection, contagion, wars, accidents, call it what you will. Now, what happens in my consciousness determines what happens in your experience. If I am alert and refuse to accept the appearance and refuse to fight it, and recognize that any appearance has its source in the universal belief of two powers, but because this belief is not of God, it has no substance, no cause, no law of reality, you can be made quickly free, unless you yourself are hugging your fears to yourself and battling the practitioner, consciously or unconsciously. You know, Mrs. Eddy must have had a tremendous vision when she wrote, "Treat a belief in disease as you would sin, with sudden dismissal." She must have had a tremendous vision at that moment. And had that been the principle of healing in her writings, you'd have the greatest healing mission in the world on earth. It was only when they began to battle mortal mind and look to uncover the error in your thought that it wasn't possible to treat a belief in disease with sudden dismissal. If you can treat a belief in disease or sin with sudden dismissal, in the realization that it is not of God, you'll see how quickly you will have healings. Now, here comes not a question but a statement. It could be well to re-stress that it is not I that is mighty, but that it is the I am in the midst of me that is mighty. So often I note this misunderstanding of that truth in my daily contact with students. Now this is a point that is repeated over and over again in the Infinite Way writings, that man cannot be God, and that a human being under no circumstance will ever be God. As a matter of fact, no human being will ever be spiritual. You are not lifting up a human being into Christhood in the infinite way. You are not making a mortal into an immortal in the infinite way. Nor are you calling a mortal immortal, nor are you calling a human being spiritual, not in the infinite way. The I that I am is God. And nowhere in the writings does that say Joel is God. Nowhere does it say in the writings that Joel is God. It says that God is I am, and that is the I am that I am. And this results in the death of the human. Not the spiritualization of the human, the death of the human. And the rebirth as spiritual identity. This also has been written in our writings, that if you say, I am God, or I am spirit, or I am spiritual, you are mistaken. I think it says somewhere that you're lying. It couldn't ever be true that anyone will ever be able to say, I am God, except as a lie. When you attain Christhood, or your God consciousness, a voice will say inside of you, knowest thou not I am God? Then you will have attained. You will have heard it, not spoken it. When you hear within yourself, be still and know that I am God, you are hearing truth. Anytime you hear a human being say it, you are hearing a lie. The Master, when in the Spirit, could say to his disciples or the multitudes, I am the bread and the meat and the wine and the water. And when a teacher receives spiritual illumination, they can say, my peace restores harmony unto you. My grace restores harmony unto you. My presence goes with you. Because they are not saying that Joel's presence goes with you. They are not saying to you that Joel's grace is blessing you. They are saying my. That's quite different. quite different. There is an absence of Joel and the presence of the I that I am. You have heard me over and over say that I dislike to receive letters from our students saying they are getting more spiritual or they are feeling more spiritual. I don't believe it for a moment. It isn't possible to feel spiritual. Nobody can feel spiritual. Nobody ever has and nobody ever will. There is no such thing. That would be as ridiculous as feeling honest. Try to think how you'd feel if you were feeling honest. You'd probably hire a policeman to watch you. You can't feel honest, you can't feel moral, you can't feel righteous, you can't feel spiritual without being a hypocrite. What I am, and that's my state of being. It isn't something external to me that I can feel. If you realize it, you can't even feel healthy. You can be healthy, but you can't feel healthy. The only way you would know that you are being healthy is if you were partly sick and had something to compare it with. But when you're wholly healthy, you don't feel it. You are being it. When you're spiritual, you don't know it. Why do you think the Master said, "Why callest thou me good?" He didn't feel good. He just felt normal about his Father's business. He was doing that which was natural to him to do. There wasn't anything good about it. There wasn't anything bad about it. It was just being. And so it is. Nobody has ever felt moral. Nobody I ever met, anyhow. You can be it, but you certainly can't feel it without having something to compare with. So it is. The human being cannot be spiritual, and the human being cannot be God, and the human being cannot be Christ. But in proportion as the human being dies, Christhood is more and more revealed. More to the onlooker than to the individual. If you hear within you, "Thou art my Son, in whom I am well pleased," be still and know that I am God. Knowest thou not that I am God? Knowest thou not that thou art my beloved? When you hear these things, you are hearing aright. That gives you no privilege to say them, because in the saying of them you reverse their meaning. You are trying to take a human being and immortalize them, and it can't be done. Now let us watch this. I and my Father are one. Son, thou art ever with me. All that I have is thine. And as we look out from this consciousness, we realize that God constitutes this universe. God is the substance. Spirit is the substance of all form. Not the forms you see with your eyes, because you do not see spirit with your eyes. You see this mental concept based on the belief in two powers. It is for this reason that you close your eyes in treatment or prayer, only to shut out the appearances, so that you may see through the appearance to the reality. If you keep looking at the appearance, you will want to change it. If you try to change the appearance, you will be battling. You will be fighting the appearance. You will be taking up a sword, physical or mental. Whereas, once you perceive the illusory nature of the appearances, you can be still within, and then let the impartation of truth come to you. Now, when this happens, something very wonderful takes place. Sometimes it is just a deep breath or an awareness of the presence. Sometimes it goes much deeper, and you actually behold a light or become enveloped in light. Sometimes the whole universe becomes illumined. When those things happen, you can be assured that many serious diseases or conditions are dispelled. It is for this reason that meditation plays such a big part in our work. This truth that we have been voicing tonight is not the healing agency. This truth realized within us, or remembered, consciously remembered within us, merely makes it possible to sit back and ignore the appearance while the spiritual impartation takes place within us. And this it is that is the healing consciousness. The letter killeth. You might repeat this letter over and over and over again, and then wonder that no healing takes place because you used all the right words and had all the right treatment. But you did not complete your work. Your work really was to remember these basic principles so that you could lose your fear of appearances, settle back, and receive the spiritual impartation that results in healing. Now, if you meditate frequently, if you make prayer and meditation your way of life, you will evolve into a state of consciousness that doesn't have to sit back with every call for help and go through the routine of treatment. In other words, you will be living in this consciousness, living in it so completely that when the call comes, you can dismiss it instantly, because you are in that spiritual consciousness. Now, even though we begin with periods of meditation that may be only 10 seconds, 20 seconds, by the continuous practice of meditation, we eventually get to the place where a meditation can last 2 or 3 minutes. A person who can meditate for 2 or 3 minutes is very, very advanced. Very advanced. There are not many who can achieve 3 minutes of meditation, although there are lots of people who sit for 2 or 3 hours. Why, I'll never know, unless it is to hypnotize themselves. You can sit for 5 or 10 or 12 or 15 minutes in a contemplative meditation in which you are pondering some truth. But then when you stop and say, "Speak, Lord, thy servant heareth," you'll find that 20 or 30 seconds is an eternity. And that's about as long as it takes for your meditation, until through constant practice you may eventually get to that place where you can maintain a meditation for 2 or 3 minutes. By the time you're there, you can repeat that a dozen or 20 or 30 times a day and find yourself living in a continuous state of meditation, hardly ever coming out of it. That, of course, is the ideal way of living, where you can be in this world but not of it, where you can perform all of the functions of your business, your art, your profession, and still not be in it. I have had quite a bit of experience with actors and actresses who, as they come to the spiritual life, are greatly upset by the kind of parts they have to play. This should not be. A person should be able to be at the height of their spiritual capacities, and if they're in the theater, portray any part that's given them to do, and to do it better than anyone else could do it. Because they're not taking the part as if it were a reality or as if it were their nature. They are merely showing forth some characteristic of human experience. That's all the theater is. Showing forth the different facets of human existence. And so, what difference whether you're playing the part of a good man or a bad man, a good woman or a bad woman, when all you're doing is using your artistic ability to portray some facet of human experience? Well, the same thing is in business. A person should be able to engage in any business activity except a destructive one. I don't believe you could be part of the spiritual world and be engaged in the whiskey business or any of its allied lines for very long, because you would be conscious of the fact all of the time that you were not loving your neighbor, you were virtually killing him. Some in a short time and some in a longer time, but in the end you'd get them all. But any ordinary, any normal business activity, regardless of how spiritual an individual might be. Also, I'll exempt gambling from that too, even Wall Street gambling. But it would seem to me that the higher you rise in spiritual consciousness, the more wisely you'd be led even in your Wall Street investments. As long as they were investments, not gambles. Now, I bring this to your attention because no one should believe that the spiritual life is intended to set them apart in a monastery or a nunnery, convent, because that's not the function of the spiritual life. The function of the spiritual life is to bring your spiritual influence into this world. Let your light shine. Ultimately, if you attain the highest, you will be able to say, I am the light of the world. My spiritual identity, my spiritual consciousness is the light of the world, and therefore all those who touch my consciousness should be benefited. But that makes no difference whether I am selling securities or insurance or merchandise, acting, writing. Person in law might have to change the nature of his law business to stay in this life. It's another one of those things allied to the whiskey industry. But just think what happens if you can be an average man or woman and lose your fear of appearances in the realization of God as the only power. Think what an influence you can be on this earth, anywhere that you may be called upon to move, without uttering a word of this, without ever saying it to a soul. Just walking about on earth in the conscious realization, you are the temple of God. And then every bit of evil that the world presents to you, to be able to smile at it and dismiss it. That really is the function of this work, to enable us individually to rise so high in consciousness that we recognize God as the central theme of this universe and all evil as merely the belief in two powers, absolutely impersonal belief in two powers, and thereby nothingize it. I repeat, those of you who have the opportunity to hear any of the 1959 classes again, please do it, because each one of those classes drills into us this impersonalization of evil and the nothingization of it. This is the first Saturday night in 16 years of classwork that I can truthfully say I'm sorry. With every class, Saturday night has been my joy. I've been released from something terrific. But tonight is an exception, the first one in 16 years. Tonight I feel that if we could go on for another week, something great would happen. Thank you.